Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We start tonight with a major legal victory for President-elect Donald Trump. Special counsel Jack Smith had hoped to prove in court that the then outgoing president had tried to subvert the 2020 presidential election and incited a riot at the U.S. Capitol. Almost 4 years later, the Court of Public Opinion handed Trump back the keys to the White House, and today, faced with the Justice Department's policy shielding presidents from prosecution, Smith filed a motion to dismiss the election interference and classified documents cases. Late today, Judge Tanya Chutkan granted the dismissal of the January 6 case. We're waiting to hear about the classified documents one down in Florida. Joining us now, we will start off with Scott McFarlane here in Washington and Katrina Kaufman in West Palm Beach. Scott, good to see you. What led to this decision to dismiss, and what does it mean going forward for the legal issues facing the president-elect?
To be clear, this was no surprise. This was expected, but for a case that made history, this broad federal prosecution of a former U.S. president for election conspiracy, it sure does end with a whimper. Just a little 6-page filing from Jack Smith ending this chapter of American history. What he says, though, in that very brief filing is that this is not a statement about the strength of the case, that the case wasn't weakened, that the case didn't have flaws, but that you simply cannot prosecute a sitting president, that the Constitution precludes that the Department of Justice will not allow that. So this case, he says, must be dismissed, not paused, but dismissed, because he's making the argument that having this over the president's head for a few years until he leaves office is also an undue burden. So the judge, in very short order, agreed to dismiss it without prejudice, which legal analysts tell us means Trump may still seek to pardon himself to avoid any future exposure after his presidency.
Interesting. Katrina, you were there monitoring the Trump transition from the CBS News offices in West Palm Beach. We know that the judge, Tanya Chutkan, here in Washington, at least, has agreed to order the dismissal of the January 6 case. Big win for the Trump team. He said it himself in a statement, a major victory for the rule of law. What else, if anything, are we hearing from the president-elect and his team?
So, as you mentioned, Trump posted on both Truth Social and X just extolling this development. He said that these cases, like all of the cases that have been brought against him, were empty and lawless. He says that over $100 million have been wasted in the pursuit of him. And then he goes on to name the various prosecutors against him. Fani Willis, and he mentions Nathan Wade, who she was accused of having a romantic relationship with, which really held up the case in Georgia. He says that $1 million was wasted there, and they used it to take trips around the world. He mentioned Letitia James, who brought the civil fraud case against him. And then, of course, Alvin Bragg, who brought the New York criminal case against him. But Trump said that he was forced to do that by the Justice Department, and that despite all of this, he has persevered and he has won.
We are waiting for a decision in the Florida-based classified documents case. We have not heard from the judge there yet. Eileen Cannon.
Okay, so what's happened here is Jack Smith has motioned to dismiss his own appeal because, of course, that Florida classified records case against Trump was dismissed by one of his appointed judges, Eileen Cannon, 2 days after the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. She made the argument in her ruling that the Supreme Court's recent language indicated the special counsel may not have been lawfully appointed or funded. Jack Smith was appealing that, trying to resuscitate the case, and now he's going to stand down, making the same argument that can't prosecute a sitting president, so no need to resuscitate all of this appeal. But there is some sense that the special counsel may still want to litigate this issue about whether special counsels are lawfully appointed and lawfully funded. That may play out independent of Trump's exposure.
Because that was a legal theory advanced by Justice Clarence Thomas, among others, that there should be questions raised about the legality of them.
That's right.
What does this mean for those that have either been charged, found guilty, prosecuted to the fullest extent regarding January 6th, and those still awaiting trial?
There are 1,500 people who have been charged with their roles in January 6th. About 2/3 of them have pleaded guilty. A couple hundred more have been convicted at trial, which leaves a few hundred more still to be prosecuted fully. And there still are arrests. Ed, there were 2 arrests announced today for January 6, 2021. Trump has pledged pardons. Many of these defendants who have their cases open are seeking to delay them until after January 20th, hoping to get the pardon. For now, judges are saying, no, you continue with your cases. You can't speculate a pardon's coming and slow down your case. But, boy, they sure are expecting pardons when Trump takes office.
Yeah, Katrina, let's shift now to the transition. As you know, The president-elect added several more names over the weekend to his incoming administration. We have their names and faces we can show folks. There's guys like Scott Bessent, set to be his pick for Treasury Secretary, the outgoing Oregon Congresswoman Lori Chavez de Remer, who's going to be the labor pick, Brooke Rollins, one of his close policy aides for agriculture, Scott Turner, former NFL player and motivational speaker for Department of Housing and Urban Development. Is there anything that sort of speaks to who these people are, why he chose them, and are we expecting other picks to come in the coming hours or days?
We are still waiting for a few more smaller picks. One that's really notable that you just mentioned is Scott Bessent. That position of Secretary of the Treasury is very coveted, and there was really a lot of infighting over it, we heard. Bessent was an early favorite. Then it was potentially supposed to be Howard Lutnick, who ultimately got Secretary of Commerce. Then some other names came into the mix. But there's been a really positive response to the selection of Scott Bessent, who is a hedge fund manager. The markets really responded positively to that. Another notable pick is Alex Wong, who's the principal deputy national security advisor. And what's interesting about him is he is the person who facilitated Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un during his first administration. So that relationship with North Korea, he also has ties to China. You mentioned Brooke Rollins. She has a background in agriculture, actually grew up on a farm, studied agricultural development. Trump has extolled her work with 4-H.
And Katrina, do we have any better sense of whether the Trump transition team will ever use traditional FBI background checks, or are they still relying on private entities to look into the past of these picks?
It's not quite clear how they're going to move forward with that yet, Ed, but really this is just standard practice. So as of now, they are breaking with tradition, it seems, in going this route, but it's not clear that would ultimately hold up confirmation of these candidates.
Yeah, an important distinction that there's no law that requires an FBI background check. It's just been tradition because the FBI was seen as a reliable entity that could look into these things. Of course, the president-elect has a history with the FBI that doesn't necessarily sow trust. Let's put it that way. Katrina Kaufman in West Palm Beach, Scott McFarlane here in Washington. Thank you both for the latest on all that.